People often say you shouldn't lock the stable door after the horse has bolted. Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes you can see the horse getting ready to bolt with terrifying clarity, especially when your gut has been screaming at you for months that something is fundamentally wrong. But did I listen? Of course not. I was too busy playing the part of the good husband, the trusting fool, the kind of man who just nods when his wife says she's working late for the 4th time that week. It was a Tuesday night, and nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday, which should have been the first red flag. I was sprawled out on the king-size bed we'd chosen together. We'd bought it from the furniture department at John Lewis in Kingston, where the salesperson had the audacity to tell us we'd make beautiful memories on it. Well, as it turned out, my wife, Sarah, was making memories. Just not with me. I was in that strange limbo between waking and sleeping, not quite unconscious, but my brain had already started running trailers for its bizarre nightly dream festival. That's when I heard the shower start up again. It was the second one she'd had that evening. Odd, considering Sarah was far from a clean freak. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't slovenly, but she was the type to shower every other day, unless there was a big occasion. Twice in one day was unusual. My subconscious filed it away in the something's not quite right folder. As the water ran, something caught my eye. Her handbag, lying on the dressing table chair, looked like it had detonated. The zip was open, and half its contents had spilled out, scattered across the oak floorboards like a crime scene on the outskirts of London. Lip gloss, receipts, hair ties, and what looked like the entire travel-sized aisle from Boots were strewn about. I'm not the kind of man who goes through his wife's handbag. It's one of the cardinal sins of marriage, right up there with leaving the toilet seat up and forgetting an anniversary. But the mess was bothering me, and I decided to play the good husband and tidy it up before she came out, and started a late-night stress clean, something she did when work was manic. So there I was, playing the Good Samaritan, picking up Tampax and mints, wondering why any woman needs 17 lip products that all look identical. That's when my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong in the category of standard wife paraphernalia. It was small, cold to the touch, and had the sleek, metallic feel of something expensive and purposeful. I pulled it out and held it up to the lamplight. A silver tube, about 4 inches long. It had the minimalist design of something Apple would make if they went into the personal lubricant business. It was covered in Japanese writing, bold, black characters on brushed silver. It looked expensive. Not the kind of thing you'd grab while picking up milk and Lemsip from the local Tesco Express. My first thought was that it was medical. Maybe she had a problem she was too embarrassed to talk about. Women's health can be complicated, and Sarah was never one for uncomfortable conversations. But then, I thought again. If it was medical, why was it Japanese? And why hadn't she said a word to me? Curiosity killed the cat, as they say. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and scanned the text. Google Translate is a beautiful thing when you're sitting in your bedroom at 11:30 p.m., questioning everything you thought you knew about your marriage. As the translation appeared on the screen, I felt the temperature of my blood drop by a good 10 degrees. Premium personal lubricant for men. Long-lasting formula for men. Not for women, not for couples, for men. And it wasn't new. The tube was half empty, showing clear signs of frequent use. I turned it over in my hands. My mind was trying to process the object in front of me, but my gut was already 3 steps ahead, screaming the warnings I hadn't wanted to hear. My wife had never bought anything like this for us. Hell, we barely used regular lubricant, And when we did, it was the basic stuff from the chemist that looked like a medicine bottle. This thing looked like it cost more than our weekly grocery budget, and it certainly wasn't for her activities in our bedroom. I stared at the tube, as if I expected it to sprout legs and explain itself. Maybe there was a logical explanation. A gag gift from a hen party? A friend's item that ended up in her bag by mistake? Or maybe I was just being paranoid from watching too many true crime documentaries on Netflix. But then my gaze fell on her tablet. She'd left it on the desk after working on a presentation earlier. The screen was still on, showing the home screen with its neatly organized app folders that she was so proud of. Every folder had a cutesy name. Fun stuff, work tools, weekly shop. Wait, weekly shop? I'd never seen Sarah use a grocery shopping app in her life. This was the woman who made me drive to 3 different supermarkets because she insisted on buying specific brands. Suddenly, she has a weekly shop folder on her tablet. It was like finding a secret stash of burgers hidden by your vegan friend. My hand was shaking as I tapped the folder. Inside was a single app I'd never seen before. Some kind of messaging platform with a deliberately generic-looking icon. My thumb hovered over it for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. This was it. The moment I found out if I was just a paranoid husband or if my entire life was a lie. I opened the app. The chat history loaded, and at the very top was a conversation with someone named Leo. The profile picture was just a silhouette, but the messages. Christ, the messages. Can't wait for Thursday. Booked our usual room at the Savoy. Bring that thing. The silver one. It makes everything so much better. I'll do things to you my husband never could. I scrolled up, the edges of my vision blurring, revealing weeks of messages, detailed descriptions of hotel rooms, explicit photos I never wanted to see, and mentions of the very brand of lubricant, now sitting in my sweaty palm. The timestamps were a punch to the gut. Every late night at the office, every drinks with the girls, every, "I'm just too tired tonight, love." It was all a lie. The shower was still running, and I could hear Sarah humming some chart-topping pop song, as carefree as you please, as if she hadn't just blown up our entire marriage with a half-used tube of Japanese lubricant and a secret chat app hidden in a fake grocery folder. I looked at the tube again, then the messages, then back at the tube. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Instead, they began to move with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. I walked quietly to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and took out a tube of industrial-strength superglue I'd bought for a DIY project last month. If Sarah wanted to play games with expensive foreign lubricants, then fine. I was going to give her an experience she would never, ever forget. The sound of the shower finally stopped. You know that feeling in a horror film where you want to scream at the dumb blonde not to go into the basement? Well, imagine you are the dumb blonde, only instead of a basement, it's your marriage. And instead of a serial killer, it's a cheating wife who's about to receive the surprise of a lifetime. I'd just finished my little arts and crafts project in the kitchen. Let's call it Extreme Home Makeover, Lubricant Edition. When I heard the bathroom door open, my heart pounded at the sound of her bare feet padding across our oak floorboards, but not in the old romantic way, more in the I'm about to witness my life detonate in real time kind of way. I hurried back to bed, clutching the doctored tube of Japanese love juice like it was the holy grail of marital revenge. My hands were steadier now. It's a strange thing. Discovering your wife's secret affair should make you tremble more, not less. But having a plan, even a completely insane one, brings a sort of zen-like focus to a man's soul. Sarah emerged from the bathroom as if she were auditioning for a shampoo commercial, wrapped in that fluffy white towel I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. The same towel that used to send my heart rate soaring whenever she'd casually drop it after a shower. Now, it just looked like a costume she wore to play the part of a faithful wife. "Darling," she said, and I swear her voice had that cloying sweetness women use when they're trying to hide something. You know the tone, the one they use when they've just spent 200 pounds in Waitrose, when they only went in for laundry detergent. "You look tired." Tired. I wanted to laugh. My entire marriage is a fraud and she thinks I look tired. Instead, I just grunted, a non-committal sound that could have meant anything from, tough day, to, "I know you're shagging a bloke named Leo." She padded into the kitchen, our kitchen, in the flat we bought together when we still believed in things like forever and till death do us part. I heard her moving around, opening cupboards, running the tap. The mundane household sounds of a woman playing house while probably planning her next tryst. A few minutes later, she came back with a glass of milk, holding it out to me like a peace offering. "Drink this," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It'll help you sleep. You've got that early meeting tomorrow, right?" And there it was, the early meeting. Something I'd mentioned casually over dinner. Something she'd filed away in her deceitful little brain as the perfect opportunity for another late-night adventure. Nothing says devoted spouse like drugging your husband so you can sneak out for your extracurricular activities. I took the glass, studying her face in the dim light. She looked so genuine, so concerned about my sleep schedule. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought she actually cared about my well-being. But I did know better now, didn't I? "Thanks, love." I took a small sip. It tasted normal, but then, I'm no expert on what a crushed-up sleeping pill tastes like in milk. It could have been Zopiclone. It could have been Night Nurse. It could have been nothing at all. But the fact that she, a woman who usually couldn't give a toss about my insomnia, was suddenly worried about my sleep, well, that was damningly suspicious. I pretended to drink about half the glass, then set it down on the bedside table with a grateful smile. "You're the best. Love you." The words felt like ash in my mouth, but her face lit up with what looked like genuine affection. That's what really drove me mad. Not just that she was cheating, but that she could look at me with such loving eyes while planning to go and get railed by some photographer named Leo. "Love you too," she whispered, leaning over to kiss my forehead like I was a sick child, not a husband she was about to betray. She slipped into bed beside me, and I could feel the warmth of her body through the towel. In the old days, that would have been my cue to move, to pull her close, and show her how much I'd missed her during a long day at the office. Now, it just felt like I was lying next to a stranger wearing my wife's skin. "Get some rest," she murmured, already turning her back to me. "You'll need your energy for tomorrow." Oh, the irony! She was worried about my energy levels while planning to burn through a night's worth of calories with her photographer friend. I wanted to ask her if Leo knew she drugged her husband, if that was part of their kinky little game. But instead, I just grunted appreciatively and closed my eyes. The next hour was probably the longest 60 minutes of my life. I lay there listening to her breathing, waiting for it to change to that deep, even rhythm that told me she thought I was completely out for the count. Every few minutes, I'd let out a little snore or shift position, perfecting my performance as the heavily sedated husband. She was thorough. I'll give her that. She waited a full hour before she moved, probably to make sure whatever she'd given me had time to take full effect. I felt the mattress shift as she carefully slid out of bed, the stealthy movements of someone who'd performed this dance before. I cracked one eye open just enough to see her silhouette in the darkness. She'd swapped the towel for a black dress, the sexy one she usually saved for our anniversary dinners. She was at the dressing table, applying lipstick with the kind of care reserved for a special occasion. At exactly 12:45 a.m., I heard our front door open softly. Then, faint voices from the hallway outside our flat. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure our neighbors could hear it through the walls. I gave her exactly 20 seconds, enough time for her to feel safe, but not enough for them to get too far away. Then I was out of bed, grabbing my dressing gown and creeping to the door like a ninja from Kensington. The hallway was dimly lit, but I could see them at the far end, near the lifts. Sarah was pressed against the wall, and some tall bloke had his hands on either side of her head, kissing her like she was the last woman on earth. Even from a distance, I could tell he was everything I wasn't. Taller, more muscular, probably 10 years younger than me. Yep, this was Leo, the man my wife thought was worth throwing away a 15-year marriage for. They broke apart, and I heard her whisper something that made him laugh. Then they were walking towards the stairwell, probably heading up to his flat or down to a car. Either way, they moved with the confident stride of people who think they've gotten away with the perfect crime. I waited until I heard the stairwell door click shut, and then I made my decision. The same clarity that had guided me in the kitchen returned, telling me exactly what I had to do. I was going to follow them. After all, a man deserves to see exactly what he's up against, doesn't he? Let me tell you something about stalking your cheating wife through your own apartment building at 1 a.m. It's like being the star of the world's most depressing reality TV show. Cheater, cheater, glue eater, coming soon to a streaming service near you, starring me, a clueless husband with a front row seat to his own personal hell. I crept down the hallway like a budget private eye, my bare feet silent on the carpet we'd all chipped in to replace during last year's building improvement drive. Funny, I guess building improvements don't extend to preventing your neighbors from shagging your wife. That's not a maintenance issue, is it? When I reached the stairwell door, it was still swinging slightly, which meant they couldn't be far. I pressed my ear to the cold metal, listening for footsteps, voices, anything that would tell me which way they'd gone. And then I heard it, a soft thud from somewhere above me, followed by what sounded like a faint laugh. They were going up, to the 4th floor, which was interesting, because as far as I knew, we didn't know anyone on the 4th floor. But then, it turned out there were a lot of things about my wife's social life I didn't know. I opened the door carefully and started to climb, keeping to the outside edge of the stairs where they were less likely to creak. Don't ask me how I knew that. Probably too many late nights watching Panorama when Sarah claimed she was too tired for anything but sleep. The 4th floor corridor was identical to ours, but flipped like a mirror image. Same beige walls, same industrial carpet, same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they had consumption. I heard voices coming from flat 4B. It was directly above our own master bedroom. Oh, the cosmic irony. My wife's lover lived 1 floor up. He was probably planning his next romantic tryst with his so-called devoted partner while listening to us argue about whose turn it was to take the bins out. I pressed myself flat against the wall next to 4B, feeling like a character in a low-budget thriller where they couldn't afford a proper set. The door was one of those cheap, hollow-core plywood things that let you hear everything, from a normal conversation to a sneeze, to, as it turned out, the sound of my marriage dissolving in real time. "I can't believe you live right above him," Sarah was saying. I could hear the thrill in her voice, the same tone she used to use back when we'd sneak away for a weekend trip, back when she still pretended to find me exciting. Makes it more fun, doesn't it? That was Leo's voice. Deep, confident, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Probably lived abroad. Women always went for that, as if having a different passport automatically made you better in bed. God, yes. Sometimes I can hear him watching TV downstairs, and all I can think about is you, up here, waiting for me. I wanted to throw up, or punch something, or both. Instead, I just stood there like a masochist, listening to my wife discuss how much she enjoyed the geographical convenience of her own betrayal. Did you bring what I asked for? Leo's voice again, closer to the door now. Of course. I could practically hear her smiling. I brought the good stuff. The stuff you like. The good stuff. The tube of Japanese lubricant that I had specially modified, now featuring enough industrial adhesive to weld a space shuttle together. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. There was a rustling sound, probably Sarah rummaging in her handbag, followed by the distinct sound of someone unscrewing the cap of a tube. My heart was beating so hard, I was sure they could hear it through the wall. Perfect, Leo said. I love how prepared you are. Oh, buddy, I thought. You have no idea how prepared she is tonight. I heard footsteps moving away from the door, deeper into the flat. The voices faded, but I could still make out the general tone. Playful, seductive, building towards what they thought was going to be another successful night of adultery. I pressed my ear harder against the door, waiting to hear what happened next. Part of me wanted to kick the door in, to confront them, to see the looks on their faces when their little secret was blown wide open. But the other part of me, the part that had carefully replaced the contents of that tube, wanted to wait and see how this played out. The flat was quiet for a few minutes, which I assumed meant they were getting down to business. I pictured Leo, lying on whatever cheap furniture he had in there, feeling pretty pleased with himself for seducing a married woman who lived one floor below and even brought her own supplies. Then I heard Sarah's voice. Just relax. This is going to be amazing. Famous last words, darling. For about 30 seconds, there was nothing but the kind of sounds you'd expect from two people who think they're about to have the time of their lives. A bit of movement, some heavy breathing, the general audio backdrop of two adults who are about to discover that karma has a really twisted sense of humor. And then, everything changed. What the? Leo's voice, sharp, confused. Wait, Sarah said. Something's not right. I could hear the first note of panic creeping into her voice. What did you do? Leo again, his voice rising. Christ, what did you put on me? I don't understand. Sarah sounded genuinely baffled, which would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. It's the same stuff as always, the silver tube, the Japanese brand you like. Well, something's wrong. We can't move. Oh my God, we're stuck. And there it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. The sweet, sweet sound of two cheaters realizing their night of passion had just turned into a medical emergency. I grinned like a psychopath, my face pressed against the door, listening to their terror escalate. Don't pull, Sarah hissed. You're making it worse. How can I not pull? We're literally glued together. That's impossible. It's lubricant, not glue. Oh, my sweet, foolish wife. If only you knew how wrong you were. The next few minutes were like listening to the most satisfying comedy show on earth. They tried everything. Water from the kitchen sink, soap from the bathroom, even what sounded like cooking oil. Nothing worked. The industrial strength adhesive was doing exactly what it was designed to do, create a permanent bond between two surfaces. In this case, those surfaces just happened to be my cheating wife and her boyfriend. "We have to call someone," Leo said, his voice tight with pain and embarrassment. "Call who? What are we going to say?" "I don't know. A doctor? 999? An ambulance? God, this is so humiliating." "You haven't seen anything yet, mate." After about 40 minutes of increasingly desperate attempts to separate themselves, they finally admitted defeat. I heard Leo making a phone call. "Yes, 999, please. I need an ambulance. It's a bit difficult to explain. We're sort of stuck." I decided that was my cue to leave. I didn't want to be in the hallway when the paramedics arrived after all. That would be awkward for everyone involved. But as I headed back to the stairs, I couldn't help but smile. Phase 1 was complete. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor so twisted and perfectly calibrated to deliver maximum irony that you almost have to believe in some kind of cosmic justice. Because as I padded back down to my flat in my dressing gown, listening to the faint sounds of horror coming from 4B, I felt like I'd just witnessed the greatest act of divine intervention since Moses parted the Red Sea. I slipped back into my flat and took up my position in the hallway, right by the front door. It was the perfect vantage point for the show. The peephole on our front door gave a fisheye view of the lifts and most of the corridor, which meant I was about to get a front row seat to what would undoubtedly be the most amusing medical emergency in the history of our building. The sounds from upstairs had escalated from panicked whispers to a full-blown crisis. I could now hear Leo's voice through the ceiling, getting louder and more desperate with each passing minute. "It's not working. Nothing's working." "Stop shouting!" Sarah snapped back, though even her whisper was loud enough to carry through the thin floorboards. "The neighbors will hear." "Oh, darling, the neighbors are definitely going to hear and see and probably record the entire thing on their phones because this is 2024 and nothing is private anymore, especially not when two naked people have been glued together like a pornographic arts and crafts project." I heard footsteps in the upstairs corridor, then the sound of Leo's door opening. Yes, we're the ones who called for the emergency." His voice was strained, talking to someone on the phone. "4th floor, flat 4B, and please be discreet." Discreet. Right. There's a discreet way to handle two adults who have superglued themselves together mid-affair. This was going to be about as discreet as setting off fireworks in a library. About 10 minutes later, I heard the ding of the lift, followed by heavy footsteps and the sound of equipment being rolled down the corridor. The paramedics had arrived, and they hadn't come lightly. There were multiple voices now, all of them trying to maintain that professional, medical calm that emergency workers use when dealing with a situation that is utterly, completely absurd. "So, let me get this straight," one paramedic was saying, his voice carrying easily through the cheap building construction. "You two are attached?" "It was an accident," Leo said quickly. "We think there was some kind of reaction with the product we were using." The product. That's what they were calling it now. Not the lubricant he used to cheat with my wife, just the product. As if they were testing a new brand of shampoo and had an unforeseen allergic reaction. "And what kind of product was that, sir?" the paramedic asked. I could hear the barely suppressed amusement in his voice. These guys had probably seen it all, but this was definitely going to be an anecdote they'd be telling in the pub for years to come. "Personal lubricant," Sarah said, her voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. "It's a Japanese brand. We've used it before with no problems. Could you speak up, ma'am?" And if you still have the packaging, I'll need to see it. Yes. There was a rustling sound, then Leo's voice. Here. But I don't understand what went wrong. This has never happened before. I wished I could have seen the paramedic's face as he examined my handiwork. The tube looked perfectly normal from the outside. Same silver case, same Japanese characters, same professional packaging. It was only the contents that had been upgraded from love potion to permanent adhesive. Sir, I'm sorry to tell you this, the paramedic said. But this isn't lubricant anymore. This is an industrial-grade adhesive. Someone has swapped the contents. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I could almost hear the cogs turning in their heads as they tried to process what they'd just heard. Someone had sabotaged their affair supplies. But who? How? Why? That's impossible, Leo finally said. The tube was sealed. Sarah took it straight out of her bag. Well, sir, unless you two decided to experiment with building materials tonight, someone has definitely tampered with this. The question is, who would have had access to it? Oh, the delicious irony. They were literally stuck together, trying to figure out who could possibly know about their little secret. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. We're going to have to take you to the hospital, the paramedic continued. This kind of adhesive isn't going to come off on its own, and we'll need special equipment to separate you safely. Can't you just, I don't know, use some kind of solvent? Sarah asked desperately. Ma'am, this stuff is designed to bond metal to concrete. It's not coming off with soap and water. We need to be very careful if we want to avoid permanent damage. Permanent damage. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I wondered if either of them was thinking about the figurative permanent damage they'd already caused, or if they were too focused on the literal permanent damage they might be facing. How do we get them downstairs? Another voice asked. They can't walk to the lift in this state. We'll have to transport them together on a stretcher. It's going to be awkward. Awkward was the understatement of the century. I was imagining the logistics of getting two adults, joined in the most intimate way possible, down 4 flights of stairs and into an ambulance. This was going to require some significant creative problem solving. I need you both to try and stay as still as possible, the lead paramedic said. Any movement could make things worse. We're going to cover you with a sheet, get you onto the stretcher, and transport you to A and E. What about our privacy? Leo asked. There will be people in the hallway, neighbors with cameras. I understand your concern, sir, but our priority right now is getting you medical attention. As for privacy, well, that's going to be a bit difficult under the circumstances. I heard more movement from upstairs, the sound of equipment being deployed, the general bustle of medical professionals trying to figure out how to handle a situation that was definitely not in the training manual. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The sound of Leo's apartment door opening, followed by multiple sets of footsteps in the upstairs hallway. They were bringing them out. I settled in at the peephole for the show of a lifetime. This was better than pay-per-view, better than any reality TV show, better than Christmas morning. This was justice, served cold and with a side of public humiliation. The lift dinged, and I heard the mechanical whir as the stretcher was rolled out. Through the peephole, I could see the paramedics maneuvering a large, sheet-covered thing towards the lift. The sheet wasn't quite big enough to cover everything, and I caught a glimpse of 2 pairs of legs sticking out at very odd angles. Following behind them was a small crowd of neighbors, drawn out by the commotion. Mrs. Higgins from 3B was there, phone out, naturally. The university students from 2 Amperes were pretending to be casual, but were blatantly filming everything. Even old Mr. Henderson from the ground floor, the building curmudgeon, had emerged from his cave to see what all the fuss was about. The lift doors closed, and the building fell quiet, save for the excited chatter of the neighbors discussing what they'd just witnessed. I waited a few more minutes, then opened my door a crack and stepped out into the hall. "Crazy night, eh?" Mrs. Higgins said, still clutching her phone. "Did you see what happened?" I shook my head, putting on my best confused neighbor face. "I heard the sirens, but I was asleep. What's going on?" "Two people got stuck together somehow," she said, her eyes gleaming with gossip. "They had to take them both to hospital on the same stretcher." "Stuck? How?" "Well," she leaned in conspiratorially, "I heard they were, intimate. And something went wrong with a product they were using. I made the appropriate shocked noises, then went back inside and poured myself a very large, very well-deserved scotch. Phase 2 was complete. You've heard of the walk of shame? Well, it turns out it's less of a walk and more of a hobble when you've been surgically separated from your illicit lover after getting superglued to them like a perverted science experiment. A very careful, very painful hobble that makes you look like you've been hit by a truck driven by karma itself. I was sitting at our kitchen table the next morning, sipping coffee and reading the news on my tablet like a normal husband whose wife hadn't just spent the night attached to another man's anatomy. That's when I heard a key in the lock. It was about 10:30 a.m., so they'd been at the hospital for roughly 9 hours, experiencing what must have been the most humiliating medical ordeal in the history of emergency medicine. The door opened slowly, as if the person on the other side was terrified of what they might find, or maybe they were just moving carefully because every step felt like walking on broken glass. Either way, it was Sarah who emerged first. And Christ, she looked like she'd been through a blender. Her hair was a mess. The perfectly styled look from last night, replaced by something that screamed, "I just spent 9 hours in a hospital bed trying to explain to medical professionals why I was attached to a man who is not my husband." Her makeup was completely gone. Her face was pale and drawn, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look like she'd aged 10 years overnight. But it was the way she was moving that really sold the "I have made some very poor life choices" aesthetic. She was hobbling, wincing with each step. Her legs were held slightly apart in a way that suggested sitting down was going to be a significant adventure for the foreseeable future. The sexy black dress she'd worn to seduce Leo was creased and stained with what looked like hospital-grade antiseptic. "Morning, love," I said, not looking up from my tablet. "Good night? You were out late." She froze in the doorway, a deer caught in the headlights, probably trying to remember whatever bullshit lie she'd prepared during the ambulance ride. There was an emergency at work, a client crisis. I had to stay late to deal with it. An emergency, a client crisis. Well, she wasn't wrong. There had certainly been an emergency, and it had definitely created a crisis. Just not the kind she was implying. "That's a shame," I said, finally looking up with my best concerned husband face. "You look exhausted. And what's with the walk? Did you hurt yourself?" The look on her face was a masterpiece. She was trying to maintain the fantasy that she'd spent the night dealing with spreadsheets and conference calls, while simultaneously trying to explain why she looked like she'd just been on a medieval torture rack. I fell down the stairs at the office, pulled something in my back, fell down the stairs. Right. That was one way to describe being surgically separated from your lover after a superglue incident. I had to admire her creativity, if not her execution. "Oh no. Did you go to the hospital?" You should get that checked out." "I did," she said quickly. "I mean, I went to A&E. They said it was just a sprain. Gave me some painkillers." She was limping towards the bedroom now, probably desperate to get out of that dress and into something that didn't smell of medical antiseptic and bad decisions. But before she could make her escape, there was another knock at the door. I got up to answer it. I had a pretty good idea who it would be, but sure enough, there stood Leo, looking like he'd just gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer who specializes in groin shots. He was tall. I'll give him that. Probably 6'2", with the kind of lean muscle that comes from a steady gym routine and a metabolism that hasn't been ruined by 15 years of marriage and stress eating. His hair was dark and styled in that carefully disheveled way that takes an hour to perfect. And under normal circumstances, he was probably what most women would call handsome. But these were not normal circumstances. His jeans were unbuttoned at the top, hanging loosely around his waist, as if he couldn't bear to have anything touching that area. He was moving with the same careful hobble as Sarah, and his face had that gray pallor that comes from spending a night under fluorescent lights. While medical professionals discuss your genitals in clinical terms. Hi, he said, his voice strained. "Is Sarah here? We need to talk about last night." Last night. As if it was some act of God that had befallen them. Not the predictable outcome of adultery meeting industrial adhesive. "Of course, come in," I said, stepping aside with a friendly smile. Sarah just got back from work. Some emergency kept her there all night. Leo's eyes widened slightly, and I saw him glance towards the bedroom, where Sarah had disappeared. He was probably wondering if she'd already concocted an elaborate cover story, and if so, which version he was supposed to be corroborating. "Ah, right," he said slowly. "That work emergency. You know how it is." "Huh. I certainly do," I said, closing the door behind him. "Crisis management, damage control, trying to fix things that have gone horribly wrong. Sometimes these situations require a very delicate touch. I was laying it on as thick as I could, but I couldn't help myself. The man was standing in my living room, probably still feeling the effects of whatever industrial solvent they'd used to detach him from my wife, and he had no idea that I knew exactly what kind of emergency had kept them both busy all night. Sarah emerged from the bedroom wearing sweatpants and a baggy t-shirt, an outfit that screamed, "I am not okay, and I don't want anything touching my body." When she saw Leo standing in our living room, her face went through about 17 different expressions in 2 seconds. "Leo," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here? We need to discuss the situation from last night." They were both talking in code, trying to have a conversation about their medical emergency without me catching on. It was like watching two people try to discuss a bank robbery, using only words you'd find in a children's book. "Why don't you sit down?" I offered helpfully. "You both look like you're in pain." The look they exchanged was pure terror. Sitting down was clearly not on the agenda for either of them, which meant the hospital visit had been even more traumatic than I'd imagined. "Actually, I think I need to lie down," Sarah said quickly. "The painkillers are making me dizzy." "And I should be going," Leo added. "Just wanted to check you were okay." Of course she's okay," I said, putting an arm around Sarah's shoulders. She winced at my touch but tried to pass it off as tiredness. "My wife's tough. She can handle anything life throws at her." Leo nodded awkwardly and made for the door, moving like a cowboy who'd spent too much time in the saddle. "I'll call you later. About the project." "Yes," Sarah said weakly. "The project." After he left, Sarah let out a groan and collapsed onto the sofa, a move she tried to disguise as a yawn. "I think I'm coming down with something," she said. "You should probably sleep in the guest room tonight. I don't want you to catch what I have." Oh, I was pretty sure what she had wasn't contagious, unless stupidity and infidelity were now airborne diseases, which, come to think of it, would explain a lot about human behavior. "Of course, dear," I said, getting her a glass of water. "You just rest. I'll take care of everything." And I would. Starting with phase 3 of my plan. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've always been more of a fan of serving it piping hot, with a side of public humiliation. Besides, when your cheating wife is already walking like she's been kicked by a mule, what's the harm in adding a little spice to her recovery process? I played the part of the devoted husband for the rest of the afternoon, an Oscar-worthy performance that would have made Meryl Streep weep with envy. I fluffed Sarah's pillows. I adjusted the thermostat. I asked her every 20 minutes if she needed anything, acting for all the world like a man who was deeply concerned about his wife's mysterious work-related injury. She, of course, was milking it for all it was worth. Every movement was accompanied by a wince. Every change in position brought a dramatic intake of breath, and she'd developed this pathetic little whimper that she used whenever she thought I wasn't looking directly at her. It was like watching a one-woman play called The Suffering Wife, performed by someone who had never experienced actual pain but had watched a lot of daytime television. "I think I need to eat something," she said around 4 p.m., from her position as a wounded princess on the sofa. "But my stomach feels so delicate right now. Is there anything light?" Oh, her stomach felt delicate. Interesting. I wondered if that had anything to do with the stress of spending 9 hours in a hospital explaining to medical professionals why you were anatomically connected to a man who was not your husband, or if it was just a side effect of the painkillers they'd given her. "Of course, darling," I said, already heading to the kitchen. "I'll make you something special. You just rest." Special was the word for it. I'd been planning this meal since the moment she hobbled through the front door. It was going to be a carefully orchestrated assault on her already compromised digestive system, a symphony of spice. I started with lamb skewers, but these weren't for your average barbecue. I marinated the meat in a concoction that would make a jalapeno file a lawsuit. Ghost pepper powder, Carolina Reaper flakes, habanero sauce, enough capsaicin to strip paint, and for texture, I added some Thai bird's eye chilies and a healthy dollop of wasabi paste, because why not? While the lamb was absorbing the heat, I moved on to the garlic prawns. Now, I love garlic as much as the next person, but this was garlic with a purpose. Where a normal recipe might call for 2 cloves, I used about 10. Then I added garlic powder, garlic salt, and some black garlic I'd been saving for a special occasion. The prawns were swimming in enough allium to ward off every vampire in a 5-mile radius. But the pièce de résistance was the chili crab. I'd ordered it from that Singaporean place in Chinatown, the one that advertises its authentic volcanic heat and makes you sign a waiver before they'll serve you their hottest dish. This wasn't just food. It was a weaponized dining experience that came with its own fire extinguisher. "Smells amazing in here," Sarah called from the living room, her voice still maintaining that pathetic, wounded tone. "What are you making?" "Just a few of your favorites," I replied with a grin, arranging everything on a plate worthy of a Michelin-starred restaurant. "I know you've been stressed lately, so I wanted to do something special for you." Stressed. Right. Nothing raises your stress levels quite like being surgically separated from your lover. I brought out the feast on a tray, complete with a cloth napkin and the good silverware we saved for special occasions. The presentation was beautiful, restaurant-quality plating that disguised the fact that it was a meal designed to torture someone with compromised internal organs. "Oh, wow," Sarah said, trying to sit up on the sofa. "This looks incredible. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." No trouble at all," I reassured her, setting the tray down on the coffee table. "I know how much you love spicy food, and I figured after the night you've had, you could use some comfort food." That was the beauty of my plan. Sarah genuinely did love spicy food. Under normal circumstances, she could handle a heat level that would send most people running for a carton of milk. But these were not normal circumstances, were they? Her entire digestive system was probably already in revolt from stress, painkillers, and whatever hospital food they'd forced on her during her extended medical staycation. She took her first bite of the lamb, and I watched her face like a hawk studying its prey. For a brief second, her expression was one of pure appreciation. The meat was perfectly cooked. The flavors were complex and well-balanced. And in any other context, it would have been a genuinely excellent meal. And then the heat hit. It started with a slight widening of her eyes, followed by a pause in her chewing and a very careful swallow that suggested she was already regretting her life choices. But she was committed now, trapped by the need to maintain the facade that everything was fine. "This is delicious," she said, her hand already reaching for her glass of water. Her movement was just a fraction too quick to be casual. So flavorful. Flavorful. That was one way to put it. She bravely soldiered on to the prawns, each bite requiring more water and a longer pause than the last. The garlic was doing its work. I could see beads of sweat forming on her forehead, despite the fact that our flat was a pleasant 22 degrees. But it was the chili crab that really delivered the knockout blow. She took one bite, and I watched her entire body tense up, as if she'd been hit with a taser. Her face went from red to white to an interesting shade of green I had never seen on a human being before. "I need," she started to say, then stopped. Probably because speaking required breathing, and breathing was not currently her friend. "More water?" I asked helpfully, already refilling her glass. "It's got a bit of a kick to it. I should have warned you." She nodded desperately, downing the entire glass in 3 gulps. But the damage was done. I could practically see the heat spreading through her system, salting the wounds in areas already made sensitive by her medical misadventure. "I think I need to lie down," she said weakly. "The painkillers must be reacting with the food." "Of course," I said, my voice dripping with concern and sympathy. "You get some rest. I'll clean up here." She shuffled off to the bedroom, moving even more carefully than before, a woman navigating a minefield. Every step looked painful, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. As she disappeared down the hall, I heard my phone buzz with a text message. It was from my friend Tom, who works at the hospital. "Mate, you will not believe the case we had in A&E last night. Had to call in a specialist to separate 2 people who got glued together mid-shag. Funniest thing I've ever seen." "Seriously?" I texted back. "That's insane. Are they okay?" "Physically, they'll be all right eventually. But the guy developed an infection where they were separated. Had to admit him for a course of antibiotics. The woman went home, but she's going to be uncomfortable for a while. An infection. Leo's situation had just gotten worse, which meant phase 3 was going to be even more effective than I'd planned. I finished cleaning the kitchen and prepared my next surprise. In our medicine cabinet, hidden behind the aspirin and plasters, was a tube of recovery ointment, the kind of thing Sarah would need for the next few days. It was a completely innocent-looking product, designed to soothe irritated skin and promote healing. It was also about to be replaced with something that would turn her recovery process into a whole new level of hell. I unscrewed the cap, emptied the contents into the sink, and refilled the tube with capsaicin cream. The kind you use for arthritis pain, the active ingredient that makes pepper spray so effective. It looked identical to the original ointment, same color, same texture. But when Sarah applied it to her sensitive areas tomorrow morning, she was going to discover that some mistakes have consequences that just keep on giving. I put the tube back exactly where I'd found it and went to bed. Phase 3 was armed and ready. You know that moment in a horror film when the victim finally realizes that what's happening to them isn't a series of random accidents, but is connected to someone who has been orchestrating their demise all along? Well, I got to witness that exact moment in real time. And let me tell you, it was more satisfying than a perfectly aged scotch on a cold winter's night. It started around 6 a.m. with a scream that would have woken the dead. Not just any scream. This was the kind of primal, gut-wrenching shriek that comes from a person who has just discovered that their day is about to go from bad to please just kill me now. The scream came from our bathroom, and it was quickly followed by the sound of someone trying to put out a fire with their bare hands. I was already awake. I'd been lying in the guest room bed for an hour, waiting for the exact moment when Sarah would apply the recovery ointment that she thought would bring soothing relief to her already traumatized anatomy. The anticipation was killing me. It was like waiting for the finale of the world's most twisted reality TV show. "Oh my God," she screamed, and I heard something crash in the bathroom, probably the tube of ointment hitting the tiled floor, as she realized that the thing that was supposed to be healing her was instead burning her from the inside out. I gave it exactly 10 seconds long enough for the capsaicin to really take hold, but not so long that she'd start to suspect why I wasn't rushing to her aid. Then I was out of bed, running to the bathroom like the concerned husband I was pretending to be. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I yelled through the locked door. Smart woman. She'd developed trust issues about being seen by others in a vulnerable state. "I wonder why." "It's the medicine," she gasped between what sounded like hyperventilating breaths. "It's burning. Oh God, it's burning." "What medicine?" "The ointment. From the hospital. I don't know. Make it stop." I could hear water running, which meant she was probably trying to wash the cream off. Unfortunately for her, capsaicin is oil-based, so water just spreads it around. It's like trying to put out a grease fire with a garden hose. It only makes the problem worse. "Love, open the door. Let me help you." The lock clicked, and the door flew open to reveal a scene that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so perfectly engineered. Sarah was bent over the sink, splashing water on herself with the desperation of someone trying to escape from hell. Her face was red and streaked with tears, her hair was soaking wet, and she was making these little whimpering noises that would have been heartbreaking if I'd had any feelings left for her. "I can't stop it," she sobbed. "The burning won't stop. There's something wrong with that tube." I looked at the tube on the floor. My handiwork splattered across the bathroom tiles. "That's weird," I said, picking it up and examining it as if I'd never seen it before. "Isn't this the brand you always use? Maybe they changed the formula? Or maybe it's expired. I don't care what it is. Just make it stop." The beauty of capsaicin is that it doesn't just burn. It creates a deep, penetrating heat that feels like it's coming from inside your bones. And when it comes into contact with sensitive tissue, especially tissue that has already been traumatized by, say, an emergency medical separation procedure, it turns into the kind of pain that makes you question every decision you've ever made. "We need to go to the hospital," I said, draping a towel around her trembling shoulders. This isn't normal. It could be some kind of allergic reaction. I can't go back there, she whispered. Not again. Not after. Last night. Ah! And there it was. The admission that last night had been more than a work emergency. She was so focused on the burning sensation between her legs that she'd let her guard down and revealed that she had a reason to avoid the hospital that went beyond mere embarrassment. Darling, this is serious. You're in real pain, and I'm worried that fall you had yesterday has caused an infection or a complication. Her fall. Right. We were still maintaining that fiction, even as she was currently experiencing what felt like napalm being applied to her most private parts. I can't, she said again, but I could see her resolve wavering. The pain was winning the battle against her pride, which was exactly what I'd been counting on. Look at me, I said, taking her face in my hands with all the tenderness of a devoted husband. I love you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, but this is not something we can fix at home. The drive to the hospital was a symphony of agony. Sarah couldn't sit properly in the passenger seat. She was half lying, half crouching, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate the burning torment. Every bump in the road sent a new wave of pain through her, and she was gripping the door handle so tightly, I was worried she was going to rip it off. How is this happening? She kept asking. How is this happening? If only she knew the answer to that question. If only she understood that every moment of pain she was experiencing was a direct result of the choices she had made, the lies she had told, the trust she had broken. But that level of self-awareness was beyond her right now. We pulled up to the A&E entrance, the same one she'd been wheeled out of less than 12 hours before, attached to her lover like a pornographic conjoined twin. The irony was not lost on me, and I had to suppress a smile as I helped her out of the car. The triage nurse took one look at Sarah's condition and immediately upgraded her to a private room. There were definite advantages to being a repeat customer, especially when your previous visit had involved being surgically separated from someone who was not your spouse. Dr. Kim, the very same doctor who had overseen the separation procedure, walked in. He had the expression of a man who was either having the strangest week of his medical career or had entered some alternate universe where people's sex lives had declared war on basic anatomy. "Mrs. Park," he said, looking at her chart. "You're back with us again so soon. What seems to be the problem?" Sarah tried to explain about the ointment, the burning pain, the reaction she was having. Dr. Kim listened with the kind of professional patience that comes from years of dealing with medical mysteries, but I could see the concern growing in his eyes as he examined her. "This level of inflammation is severe," he finally said. "We have what appears to be a chemical burn on top of the tissue damage from yesterday's procedure, which has created a potentially serious situation." Chemical burn. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Are you certain about the ointment you used?" he asked. "Because this reaction is consistent with exposure to capsaicin or a similar irritant." Sarah looked confused, which was understandable, given that she had no idea her loving husband had been conducting chemistry experiments with her recovery supplies. "I used the same tube I always do," she said weakly. "But something was wrong with it." Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully. "Given the extent of the damage and the risk of infection, I'm recommending surgical intervention. We need to remove the affected tissue before necrosis sets in." Necrosis. Now that was a word that got your attention. It meant the death of tissue, permanent damage, the kind of consequence that couldn't be healed by time and good intentions alone. "Surgery?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm afraid so. The combination of yesterday's trauma and today's chemical exposure has created a situation where conservative treatment won't be enough." We need to debride the damaged tissue and give you the best chance for proper healing. I squeezed her hand supportively. Do whatever you think is best, doctor. We just want her to be okay. The consent forms came out, and I watched as Sarah, with a trembling hand, signed away a part of herself. She was crying now, not just from the physical pain, but from the slow dawning realization that her body was about to be permanently altered by the events of the last 24 hours. How long will the recovery be? I asked, playing the perfect concerned husband. It will be a minimum of several weeks, Dr. Kim replied. And there will be permanent changes. Some sensation may not return to normal. Permanent changes. Some sensation may not return to normal. I filed those phrases away in my mind for later, savoring them with a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the sterile hospital environment and everything to do with justice finally being served. As they wheeled Sarah away to surgery, she gripped my hand one last time. I love you, she said, her voice thick with sedation and fear. I love you too, I replied. And for the first time in months, I meant it. I loved this version of her. Vulnerable, facing the consequences, and finally paying the price for her betrayal. There's something profoundly poetic about serving your cheating wife divorce papers while she's lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV, recovering from surgery, to remove a part of her body as a direct result of her own infidelity. It's like the universe finally decided to step in and write the perfect ending to a really shitty love story. I'd spent the morning at my solicitor's office, finalizing the documents. They had been prepared with the kind of meticulous care that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. Every clause, every stipulation, every legal maneuver was designed to ensure that Sarah walked away from our marriage with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. She could have her hospital bills. The papers were tucked neatly into a manila folder as I walked down the hospital corridor, past rooms filled with people who were suffering from actual accidents and legitimate medical emergencies, unlike my wife, who was currently experiencing the long-term consequences of poor decision-making and industrial-grade adhesive. Room 304 was a private room, something I had specifically requested and paid for out of my own pocket. A gesture of kindness, let's call it. I wanted Sarah to have some privacy for what was about to be the worst conversation of her life. The kind of privacy you need when you want to scream as your entire world comes crashing down without disturbing the other patients. She was awake when I walked in, propped up against the pillows, looking like she'd aged 15 years in the last 2 days. The surgery had gone well, according to Dr. Kim, but the recovery was going to be a long, uncomfortable process. In some ways, permanently uncomfortable. You're here, she said weakly, the smile not quite reaching her eyes. I was wondering when you'd come. The nurse said visiting hours started at 10. Traffic was a nightmare. I lied smoothly, taking a seat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed. How are you feeling? Like, I've been hit by a lorry, and then the lorry backed up and hit me again. She shifted slightly and winced. The doctor says I'll be in here for another day or two, and then I'll have to recover at home for a few weeks. A few weeks of recovery. That was optimistic. From what Dr. Kim had told me in private, her recovery was going to involve a lot more than a few weeks of rest. We were talking about permanent changes to her anatomy, ongoing medical appointments, and the kind of complications that would serve as a daily reminder of her choices. About that, I said, pulling the manila folder from my briefcase. We need to talk. Something in my tone must have set off her survival instincts, because her expression went from medicated confusion to sharp alertness in 2 seconds flat. She was suddenly very awake, very focused, and very aware that this conversation was not going to be about get-well-soon flowers or chicken soup. "What is that?" she asked, eyeing the folder as if it contained a bomb. "Divorce papers," I said, placing them on the rolling table beside her bed with the casual air of someone delivering a pizza. "I need you to sign them." The silence that followed was so perfect that I could hear the drip, drip, drip of her IV, counting off the seconds. 1 drip, 2 drips, 3 drips, each one marking another moment that Sarah's brain was trying to process what I'd just said. "What?" she finally whispered. And I have to say, her timing was perfect. The word came out at the exact moment that a particularly strong dose of whatever painkiller they had her on hit her system, giving her voice a surreal, disbelieving quality. "Divorce papers," I repeated, opening the folder and fanning the documents out on the table like a hand of cards. "It's pretty straightforward. You get nothing. I get the house, the car, the savings, the investments. I get full custody of our son." She stared at the papers as if they were written in ancient Sanskrit. "I don't understand. Why? Why now? I'm in a hospital. I just had surgery." "Well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?" I said, settling back in my chair and crossing my legs as if we were discussing weekend plans instead of the complete and utter demolition of her life. "See, I know about Leo. I know about the affair. I know about the hotel rooms, the messages, the little silver tube of Japanese lubricant you've been using to enhance your extracurricular activities. You?" The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might actually faint. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, if fish could experience existential terror. "I know you drugged me, so you could sneak out for your trysts. I know about the encrypted messaging app hidden in your weekly shop folder. I know Leo lives 1 floor up, in flat 4B, and I know that your little medical emergency last night was not the work-related accident you claimed it was." Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. I could actually see her shrinking, as if someone was slowly letting the air out of her entire being. "How?" she managed to choke out. "Does it matter? What matters is that I know. And now, you're going to sign these papers, take responsibility for your choices, and get the hell out of my life." She tried to sit up straighter, which, given her current medical situation, was a mistake. The movement sent a wave of pain across her face that was almost worth the price of admission. "You can't do this," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Not like this. Not when I'm hurt and vulnerable." "Hurt and vulnerable," I laughed, and the sound came out darker than I'd intended. "That's rich. You were capable enough to make the decision to sneak around behind my back. You were capable enough to plan hotel meetings and apply lubricant to other men. But now that there are consequences, suddenly you're too hurt and vulnerable to face them?" "It didn't mean anything," she said, and I could see tears starting to well up in her eyes. "Leo was nothing to me. It was just physical. It was a mistake. A mistake." I let the word hang in the air between us. "You know what a mistake is, Sarah? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is double booking a dinner reservation. What you did was a series of deliberate choices, made over months, each one designed to betray the trust of the man who loved you." The tears were flowing freely now, and she was making those little hiccuping noises people make when they're trying to cry quietly. In another life, I might have felt sorry for her. But this was not another life. "Please," she whispered. "We can get through this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything to fix it. Anything. I leaned forward, genuinely curious. Can you fuck the affair? Can you give me back the nights I spent alone while you were with him? Can you undo the lies, the deceit, the complete and utter destruction of everything we built together? She opened her mouth to answer, but I held up a hand to stop her. Because if you can't do any of those things, and we both know you can't, then there's nothing to get through. There's just the cleanup. I stood up and moved the papers closer to her side of the bed. Sign them, Sarah. Accept that this is over, and try to maintain some small shred of dignity in how it ends. She stared at the papers for a long moment, then looked up at me, a glimmer of what might have been hope in her eyes. Our son. You can't take a son away from his mother. Watch me. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I have video of you and Leo being carried out of the building on the same stretcher. I have screenshots of your message history. I have evidence of you drugging me. Oh yes, I had the milk tested. Zolpidem, in case you were wondering. Her face went white again, but this time it was mixed with what looked like genuine fear. Any custody battle is going to involve a lot of uncomfortable questions about your judgment, your lifestyle, and your fitness as a parent. Do you really want to go down that road? With a trembling hand, she grabbed the papers and ripped them in half. I'm not signing anything, she said, and for a second, I saw a flash of the old Sarah, defiant, stubborn, convinced she could fight her way out of any situation. You want a divorce? Fine, but I'm not just going to sit back and let you take everything. I smiled and pulled another set of papers from my briefcase. I was hoping you'd say that. What's that? Plan B. If you don't sign the generous settlement I'm offering, we go to court. And in court, all of this becomes public record. The affair, the circumstances of your medical emergency, the drugging, everything. Do you really want that? She looked at the second set of papers, and I could see the exact moment she realized she was completely and utterly screwed. There was no way out, no clever legal maneuver, no last-minute rescue, just the cold, hard reality of her choices finally catching up with her. But instead of accepting defeat with grace, she did something I didn't expect. She started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of broken, hysterical laugh that people make when their sanity has finally given up and gone home. It started as a giggle and grew into a full-blown peal of laughter that echoed off the hospital room walls. You think you've won, don't you? She said, gasping for breath. You think you're so clever, so cunning, but you have no idea what you've done. Enlighten me. Leo isn't going anywhere. Even if we get divorced, even if you take everything, he'll still be there. And there are others. Did you really think he was the first? Did you really think this was some isolated incident? The words were like a slap in the face, but I kept my expression neutral. Others? Oh, darling, she said, her voice pure venom now. You have no idea how long this has been going on. Leo was just the most recent, the most convenient. But there have been others. So many others. And that was it. The final revelation that turned my carefully planned revenge from a surgical strike into something far more comprehensive. I looked at my broken, hospitalized, soon-to-be ex-wife, and I realized that Phase 4 was going to be much, much bigger than I had originally planned. You know the saying, the internet never forgets? Well, it turns out that's especially true when your cheating wife and her lover are carried to a hospital in the most humiliating position imaginable. And half your building has a smartphone with HD video capabilities. Mrs. Higgins from 3B had really outdone herself, The woman, who usually spent her time filming her cats, doing mundane cat things, had somehow managed to capture the entire ambulance scene in glorious 4 kelvins. The video was a masterpiece of accidental cinematography. It had everything: the initial confusion of the paramedics, the dawning realization that they would need a bigger stretcher, and the final shot of Leo and Sarah being carried out like some kind of pornographic sculpture. The best part was that both their faces were clearly visible. I got a copy from Mrs. Higgins under the pretense of wanting to check if Sarah was okay. She bought it, since I'd been playing the part of the worried husband to perfection for the last few days. Little did she know, I had much bigger plans for her amateur filmmaking than just checking on my wife's well-being. Within 6 hours of getting the video, I had created accounts on every major social media platform: TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook, Reddit, the whole digital ecosystem where shame multiplies like bacteria in a petri dish. The video was uploaded with a carefully crafted caption, one that told just enough of the story to go viral without getting me sued for defamation. Cheating couples Glucidant Goes Wrong really seemed to strike a chord. It was simple, direct, and guaranteed to make people hit the share button before they could even say, "What the hell?" As it turned out, the internet has an endless appetite for watching other people's lives explode in spectacular fashion. Within 12 hours, the video had over 500,000 views and was trending on multiple platforms. By day 3, it had spawned reaction videos, edited clips, and even a remixed version set to a popular song. But the real magic happened when people started recognizing them. "Holy shit, isn't that Leo from Flex Fitness?" That was one of the first comments that caught my eye. As it turned out, Leo was an Instagram fitness influencer with a sizable following who marketed himself as a relationship coach and lifestyle guru. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Within hours, someone had completely doxed him. His real name, his gym, his Instagram handle, his business website, everything was out there for the internet to scrutinize and judge they did. His gym fired him before the end of the week. Apparently, going viral for getting glued to a married woman during an affair wasn't the kind of publicity they were looking for. His Instagram account was flooded with comments ranging from helpful suggestions on better lubricant choices to detailed descriptions of what should happen to adulterers. But Leo's public crucifixion was nothing compared to what happened to Sarah. Someone recognized her from our son's school PTA meeting. Another knew her from her book club. A third recognized her from the local yoga studio she'd been frequenting for years. Once her identity was confirmed, it spread like wildfire through our social circle. Her phone started ringing off the hook. Journalists, bloggers, random internet strangers who had somehow gotten her number. She'd made the mistake of keeping all her social media accounts public, which meant everyone could see her years of carefully curated life as the perfect wife and mother. The contrast between her online persona and the reality everyone had just witnessed was comedy gold for the internet trolls. They started posting side-by-side comparisons. Sarah's Instagram post captioned, "Date night with my amazing husband," next to a screenshot from the ambulance video, a still frame of her being carried out, attached to another man, next to her Facebook post about loyalty and trust in a marriage. Her friends began to distance themselves, one by one. The book club mysteriously had scheduling conflicts whenever she tried to join a meeting. The yoga studio suddenly couldn't find her membership details in their system. Even the cashiers at the local Waitrose started giving her looks that could freeze hell over. But the real masterpiece came when I discovered something that made Leo's affair look amateurish. Hidden in her tablet's browsing history was evidence that made my blood run cold and expanded my plan for revenge exponentially. She hadn't been lying about there being others. There had been so many others, an entire network of them, a private group run through encrypted apps and dedicated websites for married people looking for discreet encounters. This wasn't just casual cheating. This was organized, systematic infidelity, with membership fees, background checks, and regular events. Sarah had been a premium member for over 3 years. 3 fucking years. The evidence was all there. Hotel receipts, membership confirmations, even reviews she'd written about other members. She had been living a complete double life, and I had been too stupid and trusting to see it. But I saw it all now, and more importantly, I had documentation for all of it. I printed out every piece of evidence, organized it into a comprehensive file, and walked straight into the local police station. Not because adultery is illegal, unfortunately. It isn't. But because the network itself was involved in some activities that were definitely crossing legal lines. For starters, there was the tax evasion. The membership fees were not being declared as income by the organizers. Then there was the issue of prostitution. Some members were paying other members for their services, which made it a commercial operation. And the real kicker was that several of the members were using company credit cards and expense accounts to fund their activities, which meant embezzlement and fraud. Detective Inspector Evans listened to my story with the expression of a man who thought he'd seen it all and was rapidly discovering he was wrong. When I finished laying out the evidence, he just sat there for a moment, shaking his head. "This is going to bring a lot of people down," he finally said. "Good," I replied. "It should." Within a week, the investigation had expanded to include the National Crime Agency. As it turned out, the network operated across multiple counties, which gave it national jurisdiction. Assets were frozen, arrests were made, and suddenly, Sarah wasn't just dealing with public humiliation. She was facing potential criminal charges. The local news picked up the story, and our little suburban scandal became a cautionary tale about modern marriage and digital infidelity. Sarah's picture was on the evening news, identified as a key figure in a multi-county adultery ring. She stopped leaving the house entirely, stopped answering her phone, stopped responding to emails or texts. She was a prisoner in our home, terrified to face a world that now knew exactly who she really was. And Leo? He disappeared completely, left town, closed his social media accounts, and vanished as if he'd never existed. A smart move, really. The internet has a long memory, but it's also easily distracted if you remove yourself from the equation. But Sarah couldn't disappear. She had too many ties, too many responsibilities, too much evidence linking her to everything. She was trapped, and she knew it. Phase 4 was exceeding all expectations. 3 weeks later, Leo made the mistake of coming back. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying a morning coffee and the peaceful silence that comes with having the house to yourself, when I heard a familiar shouting sound from the front garden. I looked through the window to see Leo standing on our doorstep, gesticulating wildly at Sarah, who was blocking the doorway as if she were guarding Fort Knox instead of a suburban semi. The man looked like he'd been living rough, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, with that desperate energy that comes from having your entire life implode on social media. Turns out disappearing hadn't worked out as well as he'd hoped. The internet may have a short attention span, but debt collectors and angry gym owners have much longer memories. "You owe me 12 grand, he was yelling, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Hospital bills, lost income, solicitors' fees. This is all your fault." And Sarah's voice was sharp and bitter when she replied. My fault? You were the one who suggested we use that stuff in the first place. I didn't ask you to bring fucking superglue. And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. Even better, Mrs. Higgins was already on her balcony with her phone out, probably live streaming the entire thing. Some people never learn. The argument escalated quickly from there. Leo pushed past Sarah and into the house, and she followed him in. Their voices carried through the thin walls as they continued to blame each other inside my house. Well, technically my house, now that the divorce papers had finally been processed. I could hear them moving around upstairs, probably in what used to be our bedroom. Leo's voice was getting louder, more aggressive, while Sarah fought back with the kind of vicious anger that comes from having nothing left to lose. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of a slap, followed by a crash, more shouting, and what sounded like furniture being thrown. I waited exactly 5 minutes before I called my contact at the police station. Yes, D.I. Evans, it's me again. Same address. Domestic disturbance. Possible assault. You might want to send a couple of patrol cars. The police arrived just as Leo was stumbling out of the house, clutching his face where Sarah had apparently hit him with something heavy. She followed him onto the doorstep, screaming a string of profanities that would make a sailor blush. And that's when Leo made his second mistake of the day. He shoved her. Sarah went down hard on the concrete steps, and that's when the police officers decided they'd seen enough. Leo was in handcuffs before he could even explain that he was just there to collect a debt. Sarah was in handcuffs 30 seconds later when she tried to attack the officers for arresting her meal ticket. The beautiful thing about having a criminal investigation already underway is that any new charges just get added to the existing case file. Leo's assault charge became part of the larger fraud investigation. Sarah's obstruction of justice and resisting arrest joined her embezzlement charges. By the time the dust settled, they were both looking at serious prison time. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but it was just a formality. When one parent is in custody awaiting trial, and the other has a documented file proving systematic fraud and infidelity, family court judges tend to make up their minds pretty quickly. I walked out of that courthouse with full custody, the house, the car, and a clean start. Our son had been staying with my sister during the proceedings, happily unaware that his mother had systematically destroyed her own life through a combination of stupidity and greed. That night, I sat in my quiet house with a glass of 2 0-year-old scotch and toasted the absence of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. The place actually felt like a home again, instead of a crime scene. My phone buzzed with a text from D.I. Evans. Case closed. Both defendants took plea deals. Sarah gets 18 months, Leo gets 2 years. Thought you'd want to know. I deleted the message and poured another glass. Sometimes, justice isn't blind. Sometimes, it just needs a little help to see clearly.